Hello, I'm Gemma and this is Nonfic Books, and today I thought I would do a video all about the audiobooks I've been listening to. As you can probably guess by the fact that I have not been on here for quite a long time, I haven't really been reading. The mix of a toddler, being pregnant, trying to get ready for the new baby, life, everything, hasn't really led to me reading very much, but I decided to try audiobooks, which I haven't really listened to before. And I've been quite surprised, and I've actually sort of been listening to more than I expected. So I've got, I think, about 6 or 7 to talk about today. The first one is the audiobook of Lucy Worsley's Jane Austen at Home. I absolutely loved this. I've been planning to get around to reading this for quite a long time, and I thought it was fantastic. She explores Jane Austen's life through the medium of the houses she lived in and looking at the importance of home throughout her works. And I thought this was fantastic. I don't always agree with everything. I do always, every single Jane Austen biography I think is fairly unfair to Mrs. Austen. I think the evidence just doesn't suggest anything about the amount of sort of negativity that she is generally discussed in. But I thought this was a really good book, and for anyone looking for a book for the Jane Austen July, I highly recommend reading this. As always, Lucy Worsley is quite a win, and I thought the narrator, who I'll list all the narrators down below, I thought she was pretty good, although it would have been, in my mind, preferable to have Lucy Worsley narrating the whole thing. She did do the introduction and the conclusion though, which was pretty good fun. And then the next one was Dan Jones' The Templars. I enjoyed Dan Jones' work. I enjoy his books more than hearing him talk or something like that, because I find he's a bit over the top. But I thought this book was really interesting. I know a moderate amount about the Templars and have seen him talk about it, so I didn't learn absolutely tons, but I thought this was a very enjoyable book looking at the chronological history of the Templars and not going into too much of the sort of slightly ridiculous mythology that's come up about the Templars afterwards. It's really enjoyable, it is a good history. I think the difficulty with some books like this, for someone like myself, I don't know the areas he's discussing particularly well or the names, and so in audiobook format I tend to miss a little bit more than I would do than if I was reading. But I still thought this was really good, though I would probably recommend reading this in physical format unless you have time to sort of sit down and just be listening to the audiobook rather than doing other things as well. And that's narrated by Dan Jones himself, which I liked. I thought his voice was very good and he wasn't as over the top as he sometimes is. One of the best books that I was really surprised by is Sian Evans' Queen Bees, 6 Brilliant and Extraordinary Society Hostesses Between the Wars. I've had this on my Kindle for ages and have just not really got round to it, so I decided to give the audiobook a go, and it was brilliant. The narrator was absolutely fantastic. The 6 women she discusses were fascinating, some of which I'd heard of before, like Sybil Colfax, who was part of the, or she was a founder of Colfax and Fowler, the big decorating company, and Edith, can't remember her title, but I've heard of her before and think she's fascinating. And I'm really impressed by this book. The 6 women are fascinating. She looks at all of them together. She goes sort of chronologically and looks at how the different wars and the periods in between the wars affected all of the women, and they all had very, very different experiences. Some were British, some were American, and it was a fantastic book with a fantastic narrator. So I think, surprisingly, this is my favourite one that I listened to this month, and would highly recommend either the book or the audiobook. Definitely a winner in my book. Then, there's one that I was slightly disappointed by. That's Kathryn Hughes' Victorians Undone, Tales of the Flesh in the Age of Decorum. I just didn't think this book worked particularly. I loved the introduction, I thought the premise sounded fantastic, and then I think the rest of the book really let it down. There wasn't a particularly great theme, there was more just sort of different chapters looking at Darwin, Victoria, so it was Darwin's beard, Victoria's reaction to the Lady Flora Hastings scandal, where basically she hounded a woman who was dying because she didn't like her, and so she spread very horrible rumours about her being pregnant when she was unmarried and was basically quite a cowbag to her. Then we go into, what were the other stories? There was about Rossetti and one of his lovers, and about Fanny Adams. So if you don't know the saying, sort of sweet Fanny Adams or sweet FA actually comes from brutally murdered small child. So that's a great phrase. So each of the stories were quite interesting, but I didn't think it really did justice to the idea of the theme of the flesh. And I was just overall a bit disappointed. The one thing that I think did work on audiobook was this is a little bit lighter of a history, and I think that works quite well on audiobook if you listen to them how I listen to them, which is when I'm generally doing other things. So that was the one plus point, but overall I really wouldn't recommend this book. And then I have two that I am currently listening to, if I can get this to bring up the covers. The first one is Peter Frankopan's The Silk Roads. Ooh. A new history of the world. I have wanted to read this book since it came out, and I have been really enjoying the audiobook. It's definitely one I put on when I have a bit more time and energy to focus on it. So if I'm doing something quite quiet and I don't have little one running around, actually both audiobooks I'm listening to are a bit like that at the moment. I need to find a slightly lighter one to listen to. But this is fantastic. It's basically looking at the history of the world without the Anglo-European focus that we often get in books and historical education in the West. So this is absolutely fascinating. I'm only about 2 hours into it, and it is quite a long book, but that's just absolutely brilliant. It's really enjoyable. I didn't know anything about most of the people he's talking about, so I'm learning a lot. I'm very much enjoying it so far. And then the final one, which I'm really not surprised I'm enjoying because Little Vintage World recommended it, and I normally agree with her. Janice Hadlow's The Strangest Family, The Private Lives of George III, Queen Charlotte and the Hanoverians. This is brilliant. I'm loving the audiobook. I think the Hanoverians are fascinating, completely sort of mad, very eccentric, lots of sort of family dramas. And this book is absolutely fascinating. It seems very well researched so far, and I'm finding this a little bit easier to listen to when I'm doing other things because I am slightly more familiar. But if you don't know anything about them, I would listen to or read this book when you have a bit more time to focus because it is so interesting. And I'm really looking forward to carrying on and working my way through that. The other one I'm listening to is Juliet Stevenson narrating Persuasion, which is just perfection in my book. So yeah, those are the audiobooks I'm listening to. I'm really quite impressed with audiobooks at the moment. It's not really something I've ever listened to before, apart from when I was really quite young and had cassette tapes with stories on. But yeah, if you've got recommendations, please leave them down below, because I think this is probably how I will be consuming books for a while, especially when I've got a newborn again in a couple of months, because if I'm struggling now, what is it going to be like when there is a small child who requires even more attention than my one small child does? So leave recommendations down below. If you've got any sort of sources or lists or reviews, again, please leave them down below. It's a very new world to me, so I'd love to find out. And have you read any of these or listened to any of these? Let me know. And hopefully I will see you in a video soon. Bye!